Good morning for all the participants from Europe, and good afternoon to my colleagues and the speakers of today from Japan. I'm Lucas Coffier from the EU Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation, where I run the Technology Transfer Help Desk. Today we are here, and I can still see participants that are joining in. So, but anyway, let me introduce you to today's webinars about Japan's 2020 Space Policy Plan update and opportunities for EU industries. So today, let me give you a little bit of information about the webinar, even though maybe you already saw the agenda. We have 1 hour. We will have a short introduction from the team leader for Space Japan, my colleague Fabrizio Mura, that you see here with me. Hi, good afternoon. And then we will have the 2 speakers. And then if the time allows, hopefully so, we will have time for Q&A. We have a Q&A section. If you're not familiar with Zoom, there is a Q&A chat that you can use. So you could also write the questions while we are talking, and then we can answer in writing, or we can answer during the Q&A session. And if you are interested in having the slides of the presentations, the answer is yes. We will distribute them after the event in the following days. So without further ado, I will give the floor to my colleague, Fabrizio Mura.
Thank you, Luca, for the introduction, and good morning to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon to our speakers in Japan. I'm Fabrizio Mura, team leader for Space Japan. I'm based in Tokyo. Space Japan is a project aimed at helping European industries connect with Japan, with a focus on small and medium enterprises. We organize a couple of activities. One is an inquiry help desk, with either inquiries on the Japanese market or requests for finding partners in Japan. And we also organize events in Japan where we try to raise the awareness of European space assets like Copernicus, Galileo, and the Space Data Highway, for example. We have in the past also organized matchmaking events in Japan, and we're thinking perhaps in the future to do something virtually should the right opportunity arise. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker here, Dr. Shigeki Kuzuoka from Satellite Business Network. Kuzuoka-san has over 40 years of experience in the space business, comes from a background of Earth observation in business development, sales, market research, startup coaching, and technology consulting, and has also worked with companies like Mitsubishi Electric and NEC, which are 2 of Japan's most prominent satellite makers. Kuzuoka-san is also currently president of a consulting company called Satellite Business Network, and serves as the head of Euroconsult in Japan. He's also a very busy member of a newly founded startup company in Japan called Spaceshift. Kuzuoka-san, can I ask you to take the floor?
Okay, thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you for your introduction. And nice to meet you, everyone. And I'm Shige Kuzuoka. Shigeki Kuzuoka. Please call me Shige for short. Okay, can I share my screen? Okay. Then I heard that I have 20 minutes maybe, but I'm not for sure how long does it take. So I'd like to concentrate my presentation on update of the opportunity, especially for the space policy basic plan, but I'd like to explain some other topics also if possible. Luca, can you see my presentation?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Good.
If you want to go full screen, if you can, or otherwise, if you want to show more bigger fonts, it's fine.
Like that. I'd like to enlarge my presentation sometimes.
Perfect.
So, okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Then, as Fabrizio mentioned, that I have many caps or titles. Then depending on the client or depending on the case, sometimes I use different name business card. But first company is that the Satellite Business Network. That is my own company. After the retirement of the satellite manufacturing companies, I started this consulting company 6 or 7 years ago. Then my mission is to bridging the Japanese space industries and the global space industry. But at the same time, bridging the big enterprises and the startups also. I have many clients in Japan, like government itself, enterprises and startups. Or sometimes I have the clients from the non-Japanese company. When they'd like to penetrate into Japan business, and they ask me to set up that business strategy or something like that. But at the same time, maybe that I heard that many of our audiences comes from European area. Maybe some of them know this company's name, Euroconsult. Euroconsult is a global consulting company specializing in space market. We have a big headquarter office at Paris and North American office at Montreal, Canada, and Washington, D.C., USA. Then the fourth office is my office, Yokohama, Japan. That means that the Satellite Business Network, my company is handling the Euroconsult Japan office also. Then, today, that is my background. Today, I'd like to explain the space policy in Japan mainly. But if I have enough time, I'd like to mention some key players or some Japanese space industry figures. Especially if I have time, that I'd like to explain a little bit about the space budget this year. Okay. In order to explain the space policy in Japan, our space policy is really organized, well organized, or hierarchically organized. At first, we have basic space law. It is issued in 2008. That is the starting point of our space policy right now. But for one comment, before 2008, before basic space law, Japanese government allows the space activities only for science or the research and development or for the scientific use. At that time, and the agency, the name of the responsible agency is NASDA, National Aerospace Development Agency. But after 2008, they changed the name to Japan Aerospace Exploitation Agency. That means that JAXA's role has been changed from only development, but for development and utilization and everything. Then, after 2008, based on basic space law, Japanese government defined that basic plan on space policy. This basic plan has been updated every 3 or 4 years. This basic plan defines the goal of the space programs or the direction. The latest basic plan was released in the last summer, June 30, 2020. Yes, that is the main topic today. But after this basic plan on space policy, the Japanese government decide the implementation plan every year. because the basic plan is updated every 3 or 4 years, then every year, Japanese government defines the detailed roadmaps as a name of the implementation plan. Please remember this hierarchical structure of the space policy in Japan. Okay, then, and before explaining the detail of each item, and as assumption that I'd like to ask you to remember this budget cycle. First of all, the Japanese fiscal year starts from April. Then, for example, our fiscal year 2021 starts from April 2021 to May, not May, but March, sorry, March 2022. Then, mainly in June or the summertime, the government defined the priority items on the next implementation plan. As I explained, implementation plan will be updated every year, usually every December. Then on June, the government decide the priority items. Then they decide the implementation plan on December. Then at the same time, Japanese budget requests us from maybe August. Every ministry is summarize the budget request based on these priority items, then submit the request to the Ministry of Finance maybe at the end of August. Then from the end of August, Ministry of Finance and each ministry will discuss about the budget. Then the budget proposal to the debt will be fixed on the end of December, almost same time as the implementation plan. Then currently that the Diet is discussing that all budget. I hope that it will be finalized and decided by the end of March. That means if you'd like to ask the Japanese government to start a new project, at first, that the new project will be defined in the priority item at first. Then it should be included in the implementation plan. Then based on this implementation plan, and you can ask the budget to the Ministry of Finance. That is the budget cycle in Japan. Then I'll explain the three items. The first one is the basic space law. Please check it, but we are sorry, but I don't know why, but it is released only in Japanese. But the key items of the basic law is that the peaceful use of the space. Before the basic space law, as I explained, that the space activities were approved only for technical development and without any relation to military or the defense, even though it is the peaceful use. But based on this basic space law, for example, the Ministry of Defense can use the space technology for the peaceful use. That is a really big point for this law. Then the second point is that the promotion of the space utilization. Before the space law, our activities, space activities, only for the development. There is no description about the utilization of the space. But the promotion of the space utilization is the second target. Then, of course, that we have to maintain and strengthen the space industry and the science and technology infrastructure. But these 2 points are the really big changes at 2008. Then based on this basic space law, the Japanese government set up the basic plan for space policy. Then, and they updated every 3 or 4 years. Fortunately, you can find that the English version of the abstract on the June 2020 version. In this basic plan, you can find the environment awareness regarding the space policy and Japan's goal. Then this document describes the basic stance. But important point is that this specific approach to space policy. In 2020 version, there are 4 important items. The first one is ensuring the space security related to the space SSA or the resiliency or something like that. The second one is contributing to disaster mitigation or something. I will explain this portion later. Then that is the goal of Japan's space policy. This document, the contents of this document is really rich. Then on one paper has a lot of information that we have to enlarge the slide like this one. This is the one of the style of basic policy, space basic plan. The important point is, as I told you, that space security is one of the important point. And contributing the disaster management. If you can find a specific terms in this basic plan or implementation plan, Japanese government will put the budget on that project. That is really important. You have to find the technical words in the basic plan or implementation plan. For example, frankly speaking, there is a technical term, disaster management. That means that the Japanese government will put the budget to monitor the disaster management, to monitor the disaster or to manage the disaster using the space asset. But you can, for example, you cannot find any technical terms related to agriculture, for example. That means the budget to the agriculture or the utilization of the space technology for agriculture is not so prioritized. The budget for that segment is really small. That is important. Okay. The important of the version 2020, you can find this portion. Of course, that for the basics, strength the comprehensive basic, of course, that we need to upgrading the space transportation. That means that upgrading the H3 or Epsilon. But at the same time, development and the demonstration of satellites. That is a new word at the 2020 version. Until now, we have the satellite named ETS, Engineering Test Satellite. But this time, and they changed the name and demonstration of the satellite, which leading edge technology, and I will explain it later, but it's a new platform. Then as one of the example of the four approach, I will explain the number 4, realizing economic growth. That means that in order to, this page shows that the space technology can improve or make the economic growth. For example, it relates to Space and Society 5.0. Then there are several major programs. Please remember this order is really important. For example, expanding the use of satellite data. That is that it has that first priority and relates to the open and freely accessible governmental satellite data. That's why Japanese government developed the TELUS, a kind of the open data platform for the EU satellite. That is TELUS. Then at the same time that the number 4, expansion of the procurement from private entities, including startups. It is really important. Based on this item, for example, Ministry of Defense started to purchase the EU data from startup companies. Every budget and every policy is related to this basic plan and implementation plan. Implementation plan is really a detailed roadmap, but this is the one abstract page. It is really, it has the rich contents. Ensuring the security in space, for example, please check it. The version 2020 version of implementation plan, then we can find that a new terminology, hypersonic gliding weapons, HGVs. That means that especially Ministry of Defense would like to develop the constellation to detect the HGV. That is the new topic based on this implementation plan. Or for the civil area, we will build a promotion system for the satellite development of demonstration platform. Satellite demonstration development and platform is a kind of the small test satellite to validate the new technology in the space. That means that we are just started what kind of the new technology will be demonstrated. Based on this road plan, the budget will be big. Budget is authorized. Then after this summary paper, you can find that a roadmap for every item. As one of the example, I will show the development of operation of remote sensing satellites. I didn't have enough time to translate everything, but please remember this red triangle show the launch. This means ELOS 3, the next optical satellite, will be launched at the end of 2021. End of 2021 means that the spring of the 2022, maybe the next year. Then they've already started the development of the successor of ELOS 3, that means the optical sensor satellite, it would be launched in 2022. But before then, we will launch the satellite, ALOS 4 satellite in 2022, fiscal year 2022. That means that the summer of the 2022. Then at the same time that we are planning to develop the successor of the ALOS 4 satellite to be launched on maybe summer 2028. Please remember, if you are interested in the Japanese space project, you can check this kind of the implementation plan. This implementation plan explains that what kind of satellite will be launched when, and the design, when will the design start. Every information is included in the documents. Okay, I think that that is that basic the basics of our space policy. I'm afraid I don't have enough time to explain the key players and the budget, but one point I'd like to explain. Please check that my presentation after this webinar. I heard Fabrizio will distribute my presentation to you. Then, important point and news is that usually the space budget, governmental budget, is about 3 billion yen. Okuen means 100 million yen is about $1 million US dollars. Usually, we have the budget about 3 billion. However, this year, the government requested 5.4 billion yen as a budget. Of course, that they are discussing in the diet right now, but it will be approved soon by the end of March. If it goes up to this budget, and our space activities will be getting more active than the previous years. Thanks so much. That's all for my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiga-san, for the presentation that, as you also said, we will share after the event in the following days. So I would like to also remind that if there are questions, yes, okay, perfect. I can see that there is already something in the chat. So we will either answer during the next presentation or during the dedicated Q&A section. So it's my pleasure also to introduce you to the second speaker of today, Dr. Aaron Lynch from Space. Aaron, nice to see you again. Let me give you just give me just 1 minute to introduce you. Aaron is the founder and the general manager of Space, that it's a startup specializing in the design of space transportation and rocket propulsion systems with a base in Tsukuba here in Japan. And prior to starting this company, Aaron has been a propulsion engineer at the Ariane Directorate at CNS, the French space agency, held research positions at the former National Aerospace Laboratory of Japan, today JAXA, and the European Space Agency, and has recently completed a Minerva research assignment on Japan's space security and defense sector. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So first I'll share my screen with you. So what I want to talk is my work during my Minerva Fellowship, where I was looking into space safety, security, and defense sector in Japan. And very interestingly enough, several key items which I want to present to you now, have already been mentioned to you by Dr. Kusoka just in his presentation. Now, number one question is, why is there an increased attention to space safety, security, and defense? And there is three topics which I want to touch briefly. One is the military threats which are growing. Also, these have been briefly mentioned, and I want to go a bit more into detail what hypersonic light vehicles are. Then there is a big issue concerning the debris we have been created over the last decades, or let's say the major spacefaring nations have been created. And then also there is natural space threats, which due to increasing sensor capability, we are much more aware now. I want to talk a little bit about the situation in Japan, but also the global situation. And the reason is that space has no borders. So many or most of the items and critical points of space concern not only Japan, but the whole world. So I want to talk a little bit about the global situation and then the specific situation in Japan. Now, excuse me, in recent years, several military space agencies or space forces have been created in the world. Important to note is that those in China and Russia have been created already 4 to 5 years earlier than others. And very interesting to note is also that these space forces are not only covering space, but they are combining electronic and cyber warfare. The reason is that those nations, especially Russia and China, have recognized our dependence on space assets, such as global navigation systems and communication systems, as a strategic weakness. And now the key word is that space has become a new or the fifth domain of warfare. You can see that now India and France, US, Japan, Germany have all created space forces in the last years. Such as Japan, just in May last year, has set up a space force as part of the Air Self-Defense Force, which at the moment has a staff of 20 and is located at the Fuchu base in Tokyo. Now, what is it what has changed the world so that these space agencies are actually created? One is development of anti-satellite weapons. I will show you in a moment the effect on space debris, but one of the recent entrants in this game has been China and India. I mentioned that space has been declared a fifth domain of warfare, and it's combined electronic and cyber warfare. And the point I want to make is that this is a reality. It is not theory. Space communications, submarine internet cables, which carry about 90% of the internet communication, those are already right now subject to cyber and electronic activities. And one of the interesting examples for how this works and how real this is has been the Russian-Ukrainian war. In my report, you will see on the last page, which is going to be published in the next weeks, I'm showing some more details, which I don't have the time now to go into, but it has really changed the way how wars are fought, and space and these elements are integral part of it. Dr. Kusoka has mentioned the hypersonic light vehicles, also called hypersonic ballistic missiles. China has fielded, it's not just development, they are already operational since last year in China and about 3 to 4 years ago in Russia. The key point is there's not only no equivalent technologies, neither in Japan or in Europe, but there's also no defense against these new weapons. Now, what is it, a hypersonic light missile? I just want to show it briefly. A traditional missile flies on what is called a ballistic trajectory. Once the rocket motors stop, it flies on a predetermined flight path. Hypersonic light missiles do differently. They re-enter the atmosphere very early and can glide efficiently, and by that they can maneuver more like an airplane. And that means that current missile defense systems have a very hard time to track and protect against such missiles. The response in the US is the plan to build up a new satellite network. It's called the Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor Network, which should consist of 250 satellites and is budgeted to cost about 11 billion. Interesting in this concept is actually that the Air Force and DARPA, the development agency of the United States Armed Forces, are actually including new space companies to help to implement this project. Now, another element is space debris, and although these military activities are not very pleasant, space debris might be the even more critical element to be considered when it comes to safety in space. There's about 20,000 objects in space larger than 10 centimeters, and the 10 centimeters is the size which can be actually detected with current technologies. So if we had more capability to detect, we would actually find many more elements. And this number is increasing, in fact. You can see the increase of the space objects in this diagram. And you can also see the increase which have been caused by anti-satellite weapon tests in 2007 in China and 2009 by the first collision of satellites in orbit. Now, this collision could cause a domino, a cascading effect, which is called Kessler effect. And that risks that certain orbits, which are actually used most at this moment, might be completely unusable for unforeseeable time. And there's natural risks, especially from what is called near-Earth objects. One reason is that because of increased capability in sensors and object tracking, the number of these objects which are known and cataloged and tracked has been increasing dramatically over the last 20 years, and this is shown in this image. Now, how is the situation in Japan? Until now, in fact, and also it was presented in the previous slides, both Japan and Europe have entered the space world actually almost after the Cold War, and this has been emphasized on especially peaceful uses of outer space. This is especially true for Japan. Now, due to the geographic close location, Japan is facing risks from North Korea, China, and Russia, and that makes it quite a bit special in the entire world. And another important element to consider when it comes to space and security in Japan is the 60 years of Japan-US Safety Treaty, which is very important and which goes far beyond some industrial cooperation because it's a defense alliance, which is very important, especially in this situation of growing threats. And this can be seen, how the situation changed can be seen in this diagram, which is taken from the report of the Japanese self-defense force. It's called the Defense of Japan 2019. And it shows on the left side the number of aircraft scramblings. A scrambling is if an aircraft enters, a military aircraft enters an airspace and requires a takeoff of a defensive aircraft. And this number has been substantially increasing to about 2 to 3 scrambles every day. And that represents, this is one of the visual effects, how the situation and pressure, military pressure on Japan is growing over the last years. So how can Japan and Europe collaborate? In my opinion, there could be a step-by-step approach because it takes time, especially in a little bit sensitive field of safety, security, and defense, to build up trust. And my proposal is to go from safety elements to civil security and defense in a step-by-step approach. The benefit is that technologically, many of the elements and technological items which are needed share commonalities between these sectors, such as object tracking. Another proposal is to make use of the agility and low cost of new space. Japan has a number of new space companies. It has been demonstrated in the United States how effective new space companies can be in building up satellite constellations and space transportation systems. I think it can be a very effective way to tackle these problems. Another important element is reducing the dependency. And this can be done through mutual redundancy if we can share systems. So if one system is brought to a halt, we can use the other one systems. So for instance, a satellite navigation system. I suggest to create a EU-Japan working group who would specifically target the space security and defense items. Now, I think I will leave it here. My report is about to be published in 1 to 2 weeks. I'm showing you the web link where you will be able to find the report, but you can also email me. I would very much appreciate that and I will send you a copy as soon as it's available. And you can of course send me questions. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Aaron. We're back. And you may want to stop sharing. Perfect. So we should be all here. We are more than on time, which is very unusual, but I'm very happy to see that. We already received some questions in the Q&A section. So I don't know if you and Shige-san want to take a look and decide who's responding first. So I will leave it to you. And then, of course, I do have some questions for you as well.
Okay.
Luca, perhaps you could read out some of the questions.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe not everyone also is in front of the computer. So the first one is how EU actors can connect Japanese requests for collaboration. Is there an established channel? So probably between the two, I would say Shige and also maybe Fabrizio or myself, if there is still time to. So Shige, please.
Okay. I think that this question is really important and interesting. How we can collaborate between Japan and the EU or the EC. But based on the implementation plan last year, last December, frankly speaking, the international collaboration, the priority of the international collaboration is getting low this year, maybe because of the COVID-19 or something like that. Another reason is that currently Japanese government would like to start the Artemis project so much. They'd like to put a lot of the budget for the Artemis project or the lunar project. Currently, of course, that the JAXA and the government is talking to NASA or the United States, but the lunar project is not only for the project with the US, but it's kind of the completely international project. I believe that for the Artemis project, Artemis project, lunar project, there are a lot of the possibilities for European companies and Japanese companies to collaborate. Just now, and we've just started the Artemis project, so we need a kind of the breakdown, which portion we can collaborate with the European company. That is a question, but that is a really big topic we have to check at first. As a second, there is another possibility for the collaboration. That is the SDGs. And as I told you, one of the big items is the disaster mitigation. Disaster mitigation is one of the 17th goal of the SDGs, I believe. for such kind of the activities, maybe we can have the we can propose a kind of the collaboration. But please remember, when you'd like to propose some collaboration, you have to check that the implementation plan or basic plan in detail, which item this collaboration is related to. Such kind of the background is necessary for the proposal. That is my answer.
Thank you, Shige. Fabrizio, I don't know if you want to add something about.
I'll give Aaron a chance to take a shot at the question on the security aspects. Aaron, I note in reply to Kuzoka Sensei's presentation that if the new budget goes through, this is a major increase. And that increase is justified by what will most likely be defense-related space spendings. So the question is here, of course, a lot of it may go to defense. What can go to less defense areas and more civilian space? And perhaps Shige-san can also tackle that.
Okay, as I told you that usually we have the order of 3 billion yen budget, but this year the government is requesting 5 point something billion. The difference is near to 2 billion something like that. But in this 2 billion, the 1 billion is Artemis, the lunar project. Then for other, maybe one or less than one project billion will be shared by several ministries. But as you said, that the Ministry of Defense or the cabinet secretaries has requested that a much budget increase, especially for Ministry of Defense, and they'd like to study the how to detect the hypersonic gliding orbital systems. But at the same time, they'd like to start a study how we can achieve the resilience in the space asset, for example. Then, of course, that we'd like to, the government would like to improve the IGS or the reconnaissance systems also. As a conclusion, Artemis, Ministry of Defense or the cabinet secretariats are the big project for the budget increase, I think.
Thank you. Aaron, would you like to add something to that?
I can only double this. The needs are very urgent because Japan, as well as Europe, have been so much focused on civil and peaceful uses of outer space. Compared to the US, for instance, half of the US budget, half of the US space budget, or the same like the NASA civil space budget, is given to the Air Force for the space program. That doesn't exist in Europe, and that doesn't exist in Japan. And now the situation is that we need to follow up, unfortunately. And I think, as far as I can see, the Japanese government has very well recognized this situation. What I do hope, but that's a hope, is that the Japanese government also copies the important role which new space can play. And the second thing, which is very important, is that much of the technology which we can see today, which is revolutionizing space in the US, is actually coming from small and medium-sized enterprises through a program which is called SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research. And that in the US is a program which exists since 40 years, where 3% of the entire research budget is given to small enterprises. So, so small enterprises can make a lot of difference. But definitely, to come back to the question, the main point will be these security aspects, and there is much overlap. There's much overlap in technology, much overlap in dual use. So these things can be used for assuring space. These things can be used for cataloging space debris to be sure that we know where things are. It's the same kind of technology. If you can detect a satellite on long distance, you can also detect a smaller piece on shorter distance. So there's lots of overlap, and I definitely hope that such technologies can be shared. There could be a sharing of databases, which I would very much recommend. There could be collaboration in Europe to share data so we know where things are, situational awareness, and there's dialogues going on at this moment.
I'd like to add one point on SSA. Originally, that SSA is a project by Ministry of Defense to secure the space environment. But on this implementation plan this year, there is a small description about the SSA for the private companies. That means that, frankly speaking, Ministry of METI, Ministry of Economy, Industry and Trading, would like to use their open source technology or open data technology to handle the SSA database for not for military, but for the private companies' use. Then from this year, they'd like to start a study of the open source database for SSA. I think that is one of the area we can collaborate. I think.
Thank you. Perhaps moving on to the next question about the relationship with the US. It's clear that the space policy in Japan highlights cooperation with the US and perhaps not so much with Europe.
It does not say anything
about... What is the
about
reason behind this?
Yeah, it does not say anything about a tight relation only with the United States. It does not show any countries' names, frankly speaking. Of course that as an item, there is a name of Artemis or something like that. But Lunar project is a kind of the international project. I think that currently that we, frankly speaking, that the Japanese government are not so familiar with your activities for the Lunar or the Artemis project. But if you they learn that your activities for Lunar project, and there may be the possibilities, not only for the United States, but for the European countries also.
Luca-san, do you think that because in Europe we have the EU and ESA, that makes it a bit more difficult for Japan to understand who to talk to, if any collaboration should exist?
Sometimes some persons are confused, but on the contrary, it is real. Sometimes it works really well. For example, for the Copernicus or for the Galileo, it is not the ESA project. It is EC's project. That means that it should be not the JAXA project. The new project should be the governmental project, for example. And we can discuss the who has the responsibility for the new project. Then everyone thinks that for European case, it's not handled only by the space agency, but the government itself has a responsibility to manage that project. That is a really good simulation for Japanese government also. That's why that they have the QZSS project at the government, not at NASA, JAXA.
Aaron, can you say something as a past employee of ESA?
What I can say as a, let's say, foreigner living in Japan, is that the role the United States plays in Japan to assure the safety and security is in daily media, especially now in this increasing threat scenario. There is newspaper articles, actually very well written, I have to say, describing the situation. Almost on an everyday basis, there's discussion about ISIS missile defense systems, which is American-based systems. Um, that's what I tried to tell is that because Japan is so close to three threatening nations, the sensibility for safety and security is completely different than in Europe. I'm from a country in Austria where actually there's no sense for the self-defense capability, I would say. And that's very different here because somehow it's far away. And I think in Europe generally there is a sense that there's no critical situation. And I think Japan, the situation is very different. So I think the collaboration on space and especially defense cannot be uncoupled from the general political situation. I think if we in Europe want to have more collaboration, we need a very strong support for Japan in general on a political level. Uh, that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Mhm.
If I may add, I can see that there are other questions that I think are all interesting. We're kind of running out of time. So, but if the speakers are okay, I think it
Maybe
would
two
be.
more questions.
We can.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Perfect. Okay, good. So let's. I would say that there were some that we can group together. So, for example, what are the opportunities for EU companies in Japan, where people can see where requests for proposals are posted, and in general, what are the go-to places to or people to talk to for these things?
Good question.
I can start to explain that JAXA has RFPs on its website. Most of them are in Japanese language. Some of them are in English, and that's an indication that perhaps a non-Japanese collaboration is desired. But outside JAXA, yes, I think Kuzoka-san or Aaron, if you have some ideas, you're welcome.
Anyway, that supporting the penetration to Japan market is one of my business. Sometimes that non-Japanese companies ask me to learn how to penetrate into Japan market. At that time, first of all, I will explain that, frankly speaking, it is really difficult for the Europe, not on European, but non-Japanese company to be involved in the Japanese project directly. At that time, I will find that the best collaborator in Japan. And if you find that the good partners in Japan, it's easy to contact to the Japan program. Then at that time, usually I will select the 10 candidates to collaborate, for example, including trading companies. Trading companies are really important for Japan business. And of course, the manufacturers, there are many manufacturers from the small one to the big one. Then depending on the topics, at first you have to find the good partners in Japan to collaborate to propose the project or the product or the service to the Japanese government.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would also say, especially for small companies, it is quite difficult. There is quite an important language barrier, I have to say, which I'm personally actually facing at this moment. I'm speaking some Japanese, but at the moment not enough. And that's quite a barrier. And I think it's in both directions. But I think if you look how some Japanese companies are successful in building bridges to Europe, I think there is very good chances. There is no hard borders. And this is also what I have been learning with my communication with the Japanese government. They keep on telling there's no hard borders. There's no hard restrictions who can collaborate. there is, let's say, rouge countries, and you have to be careful with this. So collaborating with certain countries and technologies, there you have to be careful, but it's not complicated. Um, so I think the most important thing is to find technology partners who have interesting technologies to collaborate. And that could be, in fact, maybe one of the roles also of the EU Japan office. And I think especially through pitching events. Venture capital pitching events are not only to find investors, they are also to find other companies who have interesting technologies. So having pitching events could be one way to bring especially small companies together. And again, I think the strength is trying to find small companies, venture capital companies, they can go very fast and very effective. I think we have to leverage this in the future to be competitive, to make an industry which is competitive. Otherwise, if we keep going the same way in space development, it is clear how the world is changing in the US. And I think we have in Japan and Europe, we have to follow this trend. If we don't, there will be no space industry in 30 years in Europe. I'm convinced.
One point I have to emphasize is that we Japan do not have any buy American, not buy Japanese policy clearly. That means that if you can find a good partners and as a team, you can propose the good service or the products to the Japanese government, even though the origin comes from the Europe. There is no buy Japan rule like the United States.
I would even say the opposite from my experiences. The Japanese companies are very interested in discussing, but also they are calculating very strictly. They are calculating if a corporation can be to their benefit, if they can make a profit or not. And that also depends on trust. I think business is trust, being trustful to each other. And that doesn't come from one day to the other. So I think it has to start step by step, and it can be built up. And I think there are several ways to support this. So I'm optimistic, and definitely Japan is open to this kind of collaborations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fabrizio, if you're okay, and also the speakers are okay, I will give the floor maybe to Philippe. We're about to close, so I would like to introduce you to Philippe de Taxis-Dupoet, that is the EU side managing director at the EU Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation. Philippe is today with us to give us closing remarks. And then once again, I would like to remind to all the attendees, thank you for being with us until now. We will be sharing with you the presentation and also try to answer the unanswered questions that I still see here, and please do be in touch with us whenever you want. So Philippe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And so my name is Philippe de Taxis-Dupoet. I am Managing Director at the EU Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation, and I'm also Minister Counselor at the EU delegation to Japan. So I have a sort of double hat here in Japan. So a few things coming back to your very interesting discussion. First of all, a big thank you to the two speakers, Mr. Kuzuoka and Mr. Lynch, for your excellent presentation, clear and concise. And also thank you to the, I see 79 participants who have followed your presentation and also asked questions. This is quite a number of participants, you know, and that's the positive aspect of the digitalization of our conferences. We have in general much more people, much more participants than compared with the classical physical seminars and conferences. So now, what I would like to say is that this kind of webinars, we will continue to organize in the coming months on different aspects of space. This is a very important topic, so be ready to be informed about our coming events and webinars and specific topics. I would like also to come back on something that you have mentioned in the discussion, and I see also in the question, you know, about the opportunities for European SMEs to contact businesses in Japan. You know, this kind of matchmaking, this kind of. So yes, the center is doing this sort of things. In particular, we are using very much a tool, a network, which is called the European Enterprise Network, EEN. That's hundreds of stakeholders in Europe, 600. And for Japan, the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation is the EEN member in Japan. So we can help European SMEs to find the proper partners in Japan, and it works also the other way around. We can help Japanese SMEs or Japanese companies to find partners in Europe. I see also that one of the questions was related to the EU Research and Innovation Program. Now we have this Horizon 2020, and tomorrow we will have the new program, the bigger program called Horizon Europe. And again, the center is involved in this research and innovation program because we are the so-called national contact point in Japan. So we can help Japanese and European researchers to find each other and to come together in responding to call for proposals in this EU program. And last thing is, of course, this space team that we have within the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation is not a standalone, isolated initiative. It is part of a package of support that we provide to the European small and medium enterprises in particular. So I would like to draw your attention on the other instruments, other activities that the center is implementing, because you might be interested in some of them. So I propose, Luca, that after this webinar, we provide to all the participants this two-pager, which is a good summary of everything that we do, and that you can actually find out, hopefully, something which is interesting for your company or for your activities. And very last point is coming back to what Aaron mentioned, you know, this question of trust. This is an intangible dimension which is very important everywhere, but I would say in particular in Japan, including for the business cooperation, trust. And what I would like to say here is that, you know, the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation has been created in 1987, 33 years ago. So over the 3 decades, we had the opportunities to work together and to build this kind of very important trust, which is essential. And we will certainly continue along this way in the future. Thank you again to all the participants and the speakers, Luca and Fabrizio, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Philippe. Just a super very final consideration, reminding, yes, that I will personally send all the materials, the two-pager, and feel free to be in touch. Of course, I already also left my email here in the chat window, but of course you will find it when I send you an email. And yes, please do be in touch. And meanwhile, during the webinar, I received a lot of contacts and requests, so feel free to be in touch. I would be happy to talk to all of you together with my colleagues. Once again, thank you to the speakers, to my colleagues, and hopefully I'll see you all soon during the next event.
Luca-san, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Aaron, thank you very much.
Thank you
all for joining us. Stay in touch.
Thank you.